He was in the middle of a sentence about third quarter projections when Simone's name appeared on his screen for the third time that evening. It was 10:54 on a Thursday in January. The kind of January that Halifax knew better than most cities, the wet, bone-through cold that came in off the Atlantic and didn't ask permission. Holden Ashcroft didn't register any of that. He was on the 38th floor of a Bay Street tower in Toronto, where the weather was a different category of problem, and the 12 men waiting for him to finish his sentence were not patient men. He looked at her name. He set the phone face down on the mahogany table. "As I was saying," he said. In a break room at the Dartmouth General Hospital, Simone Archer had her coat still on, and her hospital badge still clipped to her chest. She'd worked 12 hours. She'd had coffee at noon, and nothing after that. There was a smear of something orange, marker, she thought, from a 5-year-old who'd grabbed her sleeve along the cuff of her scrubs. None of that was why she was calling. She was calling because she had been carrying a decision inside her chest for 11 days, a decision she'd made and unmade and made again until it settled into something quiet and certain, and she needed to tell him before she lost her nerve. She needed to hear his voice first. That was all. Just his voice, and then she would know she was right. The call went to voicemail. She looked at her phone. She'd texted him twice before the calls. "Can you talk tonight? It's important." And then, 20 minutes later, "Holden, please. I need 5 minutes. Just 5. Nothing. She pressed call again. Voicemail, second ring. He'd sent it manually that time. She heard the way the ring cut off, not the full sequence, not the gradual fade to recording. It had been clipped. His thumb, she knew, sliding her name off the screen. Simone sat in that break room with the hum of the vending machine and the sounds of the pediatric ward beyond the door. A child crying somewhere, a television playing something with cartoon voices, and she thought about what she had planned to say. She had rehearsed it in the car that morning. While Rue sat in the back seat with a juice box and her stuffed rabbit, Simone had run through it quietly. "I turned down the Edinburgh Fellowship. I turned it down because I want to try, really try, and I needed you to know that before you heard it from anyone else, before it became just another thing I did without telling you." The fellowship had been a 2-year research position in Scotland. It had a salary that would change things. It would have meant leaving Halifax, leaving the practice, starting over somewhere cold and unfamiliar with a 4-year-old and no family nearby. She had almost taken it. For 3 weeks, she had almost taken it. And then she had thought about Holden, not the version of him she sometimes resented, not the one who canceled plans and checked his phone when she was mid-sentence, but the version she had seen on a Sunday in October when Rue had a fever of 39.2, and he had stayed, quietly, making broth he'd looked up the recipe for and reading the same picture book 4 times until she fell asleep. She had turned down the fellowship for that version of him. And the deadline had passed 8 days ago. She stood up, put her phone in her pocket, and picked up her bag. She told the floor nurse she was heading out. She took the elevator to the lobby and stepped outside. The cold hit her immediately. Freezing rain, the kind that didn't come straight down but sideways, diagonal, finding every gap between collar and skin. She ducked her head and walked fast toward the parking lot. She was not going home. She was going to drive to the airport and take the 9 o'clock to Toronto. She had looked up flights during her dinner break. There was 1 seat left. It cost $400 she didn't have free in her account this week, and she was going to buy it anyway, because if he wouldn't answer his phone, she would walk into whatever room he was in, and she would say the thing that needed to be said face to face. She had done this before, shown up in rooms she hadn't been invited to, stood in front of people who expected to be waited for, and told them plainly what she needed. She was good at it in hospital rooms. She was learning to be good at it in her own life. She pulled out of the parking lot at 10:58 and took the ramp onto Windmill Road, heading for the bridge. The freezing rain was heavier than she'd realized. The road had that particular shine, not wet, but glazed. She slowed. Her phone lit up on the passenger seat. A text from Kit. You okay? You sounded weird in that last voice note." She reached for it. She didn't make it to the bridge. The black ice was on the connector ramp, just before the merge, where the road curved slightly left and the streetlight had been out for 2 weeks. She felt the car go before she understood it was going. The back end sliding, the wheel in her hands, turning into something that no longer connected to anything real. She corrected. The correction was too fast. The car crossed the center line and struck the concrete barrier on the passenger side at 31 kilometers an hour. The airbag deployed. The sound was enormous, and then there was no sound at all for a moment, just ringing. She sat in the car. She was trying to think in order. Her face was wet. The windshield had cracked in a long diagonal line from top right to bottom left, and through it she could see the freezing rain catching the light of a distant street lamp. She reached for her phone. It wasn't in her pocket. The airbag had thrown everything, her bag, her phone, her coat from the passenger seat, somewhere in the dark of the footwells, and she couldn't find any of it. Her head was ringing. She touched the side of her face. Her hand came away dark. She thought, Rue is at the overnight sitters until tomorrow morning. She thought, Holden doesn't know where I am. She opened the door, got out. The freezing rain hit her immediately. She stood on the shoulder of the connector, looked at her car against the barrier, tilted, the front corner crumpled, and understood she would not be driving it anywhere. No one stopped. Cars passed. One slowed, didn't stop. She walked to the guardrail and sat down on it because her legs had decided that was enough. And she put her hands in her lap and looked at the wet pavement and tried to remember who she was supposed to call. In Toronto, Holden wrapped the meeting at 11:15. He poured himself a drink, checked his phone. 4 missed calls, 2 unread texts. Can you talk tonight? It's important. Holden, please. I need 5 minutes. Just 5. He read the texts. He thought, she's overthinking something again. She does this. She gets into her head after a long shift and everything feels urgent. He'd call her back in the morning, let her sleep. He put the phone on the coffee table and went to lie down on the couch. He did not think about the freezing rain that the weather alert had been sending notifications about since 5 o'clock. He did not think about the fact that please was not a word Simone Archer used lightly, or at all, unless she meant it with her whole chest. He slept. A man named Roy Gallant, driving a supply truck back from Truro, saw something at the side of the road at 11:42 that made him brake before he understood what he was looking at. A woman on a guardrail, soaking wet, dark matter at her left temple that the rain kept washing and reforming. She looked up at his headlights with an expression Roy would describe later as gone somewhere else. Not panicked, not crying, just absent in a way that scared him more than either of those things would have. He got out, asked if she was okay. She said, I think I should call someone. I can't. She paused, looked at her hands. I can't remember the number. I keep trying, but I can't remember what comes after the 4. She looked up at him. What's my name? She said. Do you know my name? Roy called 911. He gave her his jacket. He stayed with her in the rain until the ambulance arrived. The paramedics found no identification. Her wallet and phone were in the car, which had already been towed by a private company before City Dispatch reached the scene. She was transported as an unidentified female, mid-30s, head trauma, disoriented. The Dartmouth General and the QEII were both managing a multi-car pileup on the 102, trauma bays at capacity. She was routed to the Colchester East Hants Health Center in Truro, about 100 kilometers north on the 102. The attending physician documented a moderate concussion, a 3-centimeter laceration above the left temple, and significant retrograde amnesia, extent and duration undetermined. She did not know her name. She did not know who to call. She looked at the nurse who sat with her through the first hours and said very quietly, I feel like I'm late for something. I feel like someone is waiting. The nurse held her hand and said, We'll find them, sweetheart. We'll find them. She was admitted as Jane Doe at 1:07 a.m. Her chart held no name, no next of kin, no emergency contact, just a blank line where all of that was supposed to go. In Halifax, Rue's overnight sitter called Holden at 7:45 the next morning when Simone hadn't shown up and wasn't answering her phone. He sat up. He called Simone, straight to voicemail. He called Kit. Kit picked up immediately, and he knew before she spoke, from the specific quality of her silence after he said hello, that she'd been awake for a while. "When did you last talk to her?" she asked. "Last night," she called. He stopped. I didn't pick up. Silence. "She texted me at 11, Kit said. Her voice was very controlled. She said she was driving to the airport. He stood very still in his Toronto hotel room with the phone against his ear and something that he had never once allowed himself to feel opening quietly in the center of his chest. "I'll find her," he said. He said it like a man who had never had to look for something he couldn't locate by throwing money at the problem. He was about to understand what that felt like. It took 11 hours and 40 minutes. The private ambulance routing, the transfer north, the Jane Doe admission, each step took time to untangle. He had people. He made calls. He contacted every emergency department between Halifax and Amherst. He pulled in a favor from a man who knew how to move through systems quickly and without friction. By mid-afternoon, he had narrowed it to Colchester. By 7 in the evening, he was there. Dr. Pelletier met him in the corridor, a careful woman who had already assessed him from a distance. "Moderate concussion," she said. "Laceration we've closed. The amnesia is the primary concern. She cannot tell us her name. She cannot provide identifying information about her life prior to the accident." A pause. "I need to prepare you. She may look at you and see a complete stranger. If she shows distress, step back immediately." "I will." "She's been asking careful questions all day," Dr. Pelletier added, almost as an afterthought. "That's a good sign." She opened the door. The room was small. One window, blinds half drawn. The colorless quality of hospital light at night, falling across everything in a way that stripped texture and left only shape. She was sitting up in bed with her hands folded in her lap, looking at the window. There was a white bandage at her left temple, and her hair had been pulled back from her face, and she had that stillness, that absolute, particular stillness she had when she was thinking something through that was so completely her that Holden felt it move through him like a current. She looked at him. Nothing. No recognition. Just the careful, guarded attention of someone who had been visited by strangers all day and had learned to wait before deciding what they meant. He crossed the room slowly and sat down in the chair beside the bed. He did not reach for her hands. "Your name is Simone," he said. "Simone Archer. You're 33 years old. You live in Halifax on Jubilee Road. You're a family physician. You have a daughter." He stopped. "Her name is Rue. She's 4 years old. She has your eyes." She was watching his face as he spoke, not with recognition, but with the same intense, undecorated attention she always gave to things that mattered. "Does any of that?" "It doesn't feel wrong," she said. Her voice was the same, exactly the same, and the specific cruelty of hearing it directed at him like he was a stranger cost him something he hadn't budgeted for. "It's like you're describing a photograph I've never seen. The shapes are right. The substance isn't there yet." He nodded. "You called me last night," he said, 4 times. He stopped. "Started again. I didn't answer. I need you to hear that, even if it doesn't mean anything to you right now. I didn't answer, and I'm sorry. That's the most important thing I've said since I walked in here." She studied him for a long moment. "You look like someone who hasn't slept," she said. "I haven't." "How long have you been looking for me?" "Since this morning." She was quiet. Outside, a car moved through the parking lot below, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. "Were we close?" she said. 2 years, he said. "Yes, we were." She nodded, processing it the way you process new information when you have nothing to anchor it to. "I'm tired," she said finally. "I need you to let me sleep." "Okay," he stood. "I'll be right outside." He walked to the door. Her voice came quietly behind him. "What's your name?" He turned back. "Holden," he said. She nodded once, filing it, storing it carefully, and looked back at the window. He went out into the corridor and stood with his back against the wall and put his hands in his pockets and stayed there for a long time with his eyes closed, just breathing, while the fluorescent hum moved through the ceiling above him and the hospital continued around him, indifferent and continuous and completely uninterested in what had just happened to him. Kit arrived the next morning with Rue's rabbit, Simone's spare glasses, and the specific hand cream Simone used every day. She had gone to Simone's house and taken the things she knew Simone would want, the small, ordinary, deeply personal things that constitute a person's daily life. She looked at Holden when she stepped off the elevator, not with hostility, with the flat, measuring look of someone who needs to assess the damage before deciding what's salvageable. "Go sleep," she said. "There's an inn 2 blocks over. I booked you a room." "I'm not leaving." "She won't know you're gone." Kit said it without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. "And you need to be functional. You're going to need to be functional for a long time after this. Go." He went. He lay in a room that smelled of old carpet and cleaning product and stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes before his body stopped and let him under. Simone's memory returned on the second day, not all at once. First the shape of Rue's face, then the sound of her laugh, then a specific Tuesday in November when Rue had drawn a picture of the 3 of them and Holden had stood looking at it for a long time without saying anything. Then everything, the fellowship, the deadline, the 11 days, 4 calls, the freezing rain and the black ice, and then nothing until Roy Gallant's headlights. When Holden came back, she was sitting up with her hands still. She looked at him, and he knew from the way she looked at him, from the return of something direct and unguarded and very tired in her eyes, that she knew exactly who he was. "I remember," she said. He sat. He waited. "I turned down Edinburgh," she said, "for you. The deadline passed 11 days ago, and I didn't submit the application because I had decided to stay. I had decided to choose this, us." Her voice was steady and very quiet. "And I was driving to the airport to tell you that in person, because you wouldn't answer your phone, because I needed you to know I had chosen you. And now the deadline is gone, and I almost—" She stopped, looked at the window. "I need you to leave," she said. "Simone, I'm not having this conversation while I still have a bandage on my head." She looked at him directly. "I need to go home to my daughter, and I need time that you do not get to put a limit on." He stood up. He looked at her for a moment, at the woman who had given up a fellowship in Scotland and driven through a January ice storm to tell him because he could not be bothered to answer his phone, and he found nothing in his considerable arsenal that applied. No leverage, no resources, no way to make this into a problem he could manage. He had built this. One declined call at a time, over 2 years he had built exactly this. "Okay," he said. He picked up his jacket. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "I'm glad you're alive," he said. He did not turn around. She said nothing. He walked out. He changed things, not with a speech, not with a gesture large enough to be photographed, slowly and without audience, the way you change things when you have finally understood that the performance of change and the thing itself are not the same problem. He moved to Halifax in February, rented an apartment on Gottingen Street, 3 kilometers from her house. He did not tell her he was coming. He simply came the way you come when you have accepted that waiting for permission to start doing the right thing is itself the wrong thing. He learned which cafe Rue liked and which one she said was too loud. He learned that the Saturday market on Agricola was non-negotiable and that Simone took her coffee black all week and with too much cream on Sunday mornings. He did not insert himself into any of it. He just learned it, the way you learn the dimensions of a place you are trying to become worthy of. He wrote Simone a letter in February, 1 page by hand. It said that he had replayed every moment of that night and that the part he could not move past was not the accident. It was the 3 weeks before it, when she had been carrying something and he had been too occupied with everything else to notice she needed to be heard. It said he understood that love was not a passive condition. It said he was not asking for anything. He mailed it. He wrote a second letter in March and a third. He did not evaluate whether they were working. That was the old way of thinking. Everything measured against an outcome. Everything aimed at a return. He wrote them because they were true, and because some things need to be said even when nobody is required to say thank you. Kit called him in April. "She's reading them," Kit said. "That's all I'm telling you." "Okay," he said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just be actually different, not better at looking different." A pause. "There's a distinction." "I know," he said. "I know it now." The fifth letter came back in an envelope in early May, his own handwriting on the outside. A sticky note in Simone's handwriting attached to the flap. "Not yet, but keep going." He read it twice. He set it on the table in his Halifax apartment and looked out at the harbor in the May light, and did not allow himself to interpret it beyond what it said. He had learned that interpretation was the old habit dressed up as optimism. It was still control, and control was the thing that had cost him everything. He put the returned letter in the drawer where he kept things that mattered and pulled out a fresh page and started the 6th. She called him on a Saturday in June. "Are you free?" she said. "Not somewhere formal. There's a bench outside the market on Agricola. I'm there until noon." 10 minutes, he said. She was sitting on the bench when he arrived, a coffee in her hands, Rue beside her eating something from a paper bag, and deeply absorbed in a pigeon that had decided to stand very close and assess the situation. Simone looked up when she saw him. She did not look away. He sat down on the other end of the bench, not close, not far, the specific middle distance of two people feeling their way towards something they are not yet ready to name. "She's been talking about you," Simone said, without preamble. "Good things, I hope." She asked if you were still her mom's friend. Simone looked at her coffee. I didn't know what to say. "What did you tell her?" "I said I hoped so." He sat with that. The market moved around them, voices, cartwheels on pavement, the smell of something on a grill nearby. "I made myself smaller," Simone said quietly, "for a long time, not obviously, not in ways I named to myself at the time. But I arranged my life around yours, and I kept hoping that eventually you'd see it, that eventually you'd look up from whatever was urgent and see that I was right there, still waiting." She looked at her hands. "I'm not doing that again. That version of hoping without saying, that's finished." "I know," he said. "If it starts to look like that again." "I'll leave," he said. "You don't have to finish it." She looked at him, surprised by the quickness of it. "Most people argue," she said. "Most people are afraid of consequences," he said. "I spent 6 months learning what I should actually have been afraid of losing." She was quiet for a long time. Rue had abandoned the pigeon situation and climbed halfway onto Simone's lap, juice box in hand, regarding Holden with the frank and uncomplicated assessment of someone who has not yet learned to perform indifference. "Hi," Rue said. "Hi," he said. She studied him seriously. "Do you like pigeons?" "I think that one had a plan," he said. Rue considered this with the gravity it deserved. "I think so too," she said, and climbed back down to finish her pastry. Simone almost smiled. The real one, involuntary, reaching the corners of her eyes before she could decide whether to let it. He knew that smile from 2 years of mornings and hundreds of moments he had not paid close enough attention to, and seeing it now cost him something specific that was not entirely painful. "Friday," she said. "There's a fish place on the waterfront Rue likes. Nothing fancy." "I'll be there," he said. She looked at him then, a long, considered look that held everything. 2 years and the canceled evenings and the January storm and the hospital and the corridor outside her room and the letters and this bench and the pigeon with the plan and 6 months of separate, quiet, necessary living that had changed them both in ways neither of them had fully mapped yet. "Answer the phone, Holden," she said, not with anger, with something that had come through the other side of anger and found something quieter and more durable on the far side. "Whatever it is, whoever it is, if it's me, you answer." Every time, he said. Or I call back within 10 minutes and I tell you why. She held his gaze for a moment. Something settled in her expression. Not forgiveness, not a reset, not the easy version of any of this. More like a room shifting to make space for something that had been brought in carefully, with both hands, by someone who finally understood what he was carrying. Show me something different, she said quietly. Okay, he said. They sat on that bench in the June light, with the Halifax market moving around them, and Rue examining a leaf she'd found near her feet with the complete seriousness of a scientist in the field, and neither of them said anything more, because neither of them needed to. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't a clean slate, it was harder and more honest than both of those things. It was the specific beginning that only becomes possible after the specific ending. The kind where you lose something real and unretrievable and understand. Finally, in a way you cannot unlearn, what you were doing with your hands all those years when you should have been holding on. He walked home through the June afternoon with the harbor beside him and his phone in his jacket, and when it rang, a call from his CFO about something that could wait, that the CFO himself said could wait. He answered on the second ring, said he'd call back in the morning, and kept walking. Somewhere across the city, Simone Archer was home, her daughter asleep, the window open to the summer air, the particular quiet of a woman who had survived her own storm and come out the other side, knowing exactly what she was worth and what she would and would not accept from anyone ever again. And for the first time in a long time, both of them were in the same city, awake in the same evening, facing the same version of tomorrow, not because it was easy, not because everything had been repaired, but because some things, if you are honest enough and patient enough and willing enough to do the unglamorous work of actually changing, some things can be earned. That was enough. In the most precise sense, it was exactly enough.